Welcome to the Palm Court Podcast, a very special edition today. I'm joined, as always, by Grant Balfour and Megan Citron. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Mike.
How excited are you guys for what we have going on today?
I'm so excited. I can't believe that we made this happen and it's come together this way. We'll see how it all works out.
We're trying not to jinx ourselves because we have three of us plus five on this call. We're joined by a collection of folks from back in the late 60s, early 70s. Max Reif shared a set of pictures that David Ross took. Both of them are able to join us. We're also joined today by Andy Roman, David Adams, Tom Weislocher. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Palm Court Podcast.
Pleasure to be here. I'm excited. Yeah, thanks.
Plenty of work has gone in. Shout out to David Ross and Max for herding the cats. I know it's hard to get anybody on the call, but y'all really set high standards to try to be as inclusive of as many folks who can represent from back in the day. Also, the video version of this will include some of the photos that we're going to talk about. That's really what got this all started. Maybe we could start there, Max, in that you privileged all of us by deciding to share some of these photos on Facebook. Can you talk a little bit about what drove you to do that? And then maybe we could start jumping into some of the photos themselves.
Yeah, David had sent me a few photos some months or maybe up to a year ago. And, David's a very artistic person. He played jazz guitar at New College. You'd always see him on the steps without a shirt on sometimes, I think, and just really relaxed and playing. And so his photographs are very good too. And then he emailed me a couple months ago. I want to let him tell that story because this is remarkable. I discovered it. Before I start on the story, I just want to make it clear to listeners that the group of New College folks who are on this particular podcast, some of us knew each other at New College. We started, I think, did everybody start in 1968, 69?
68.
68, yeah, September 68.
Yeah. I'm 67.
David Adams is a year ahead of us. I lasted a year, and I think, Max, you were there for just a year. I got expelled after like 6 months, I think it was.
Yeah.
So I just want to make it clear to listeners, we're not like this alumni group that's been together all this time. We're reconnecting for the first time, essentially, since 1968, 69.
Yeah. Well, you and I have been in touch.
Yeah.
And I've been to Andy and David a little bit.
Yeah. And we were mentioning as part of the setup, like 1969 does have this amazing kind of psychic energy for all of us. Just we imagine it, we wonder what it was like. And not only were you guys there, and we want to get into some of the stories, but the fact that you captured them so beautifully in these photos, David, maybe you could give us a little more background around the photos themselves.
Well, one thing that distinguishes me from my fellow alums is I didn't do any grass or acid at my time at New College. In fact, in my entire life, I've never smoked a joint, taken acid, or had a drink of alcohol.
Wow.
And that just is because I was a scared little kid, basically growing up in a chaotic family, so I just was too scared to lose control.
He doesn't even drink coffee, he told me.
Yeah, I don't drink coffee. So anyway, let's see. My wife's from Iran. We've been married for about 27 years, and she was back visiting her family last year. And so I took the occasion from her being out of the house to pull out all this old storage stuff from the garage to sort through it. And I found these books of negatives. These are 35 millimeter negatives. Two of these books are about, I think, 2,000 negatives in each book. And I had a 35 millimeter camera and took pictures my senior year of high school and my 1 year at New College. But I couldn't remember what was in these books. And so what I did is, I don't know if people know this, but with an iPhone, you can reverse the settings on an iPhone so that it'll see positive instead of negative. And so I basically used that feature to scan the negatives going through them. So I could just look at it with my phone, and if I found one, I'd snap a picture of it. So that's where these come from.
So they'd been buried like 50 years or something.
Yeah, just like us.
When I saw these, he sent them, I immediately almost went to the Damon Facebook group. I post there sporadically over the years, but I thought, my God, this is a time capsule.
Yeah.
And people picked it up right away, including you guys.
Mm-hmm. Just following up on that, I think Megan reached out and I did as well, just because this is exactly the type of thing that, one of the reasons why this podcast exists is that there's such a rich cultural history to New College, but a lot of it gets lost. And to see it resurface and then to think about how deeply personal and evocative these photos are. You guys want to maybe describe some of what we're seeing?
This is us returning from our ISP where 8 of us camped out on Upper Captiva Island before it was developed. It was a deserted island. And each of us had a project, and we were there for about a month. Kitty, who's right in the middle there with the cute little yellow dress, she bought our food for us, and she was a vegetarian. So we ran out of meat right away. And so we hunted. There were raccoons on the island. And Earl, who's the guy with the green shirt with the tiki, he actually killed a raccoon and we ate it. And some benevolent fishermen gave us fish. And we did all kinds of projects there. I focused on the leadership in small groups. That was my sociology project. And did surveys of everybody. Who would you like to be with on a deserted island? Oh, that's what we were doing. So it was really very cool to disengage from civilization. There were 4 women, 4 men. We had all kinds of adventures. And I do want to share one adventure. We built this giant bonfire, and Earl, who was sort of the Nat Sci guy, he developed a remote way to ignite the fire. And the fire got so out of hand, it was so large that the Coast Guard came to check and see what was going on. And we were all so stoned. It was just a real happening.
Yeah. I mean, this is before reality television. This sounds like the type of expedition that would be pretty compelling for folks to have a window in. Is there anyone else who's on the call who's in that expedition with you?
Oh, that's me blowing the conch shell.
The steps of Hamilton Center looking, I guess, a little bit cleaner, but about the same as it did when we attended about 20 years after this photo was taken. Amazing stuff. And yeah, Florida really has changed. I mean, you mentioned Captiva Island. You know, I still being there in the late 80s, early 90s, when I go back to Sarasota now, it does feel so much more developed. And even then, what we experienced was 20 years after y'all were there. What was it like? What was Florida? I mean, especially Captiva, that must have been incredible, but just kind of around the horn, like just the natural experience of being there. And then I guess some of the elements like Palm Court, Ham Center, and the Bayfront, probably pretty similar to what many of us experienced. But what are your impressions of what Florida was like, what New College was like, and perhaps how it's changed?
Hard to know where to start. I hardly ever left but when I left campus, I got the hell out of Florida often. But I didn't spend much time outside the campus nearby in Sarasota or Tampa.
But how about the campus itself, David? I mean, impressions there. I know you were there briefly, but the actual architecture, the spaces were pretty.
Yeah, I thought the campus, my first reaction to the campus was it didn't look like any other college I'd been to. It didn't look traditional. It was very kind of clean, all the concrete. The Pei dorms were kind of spare but cool looking. So it was designy campus. So I thought it was very cool. And the Palm Court seemed like a really natural gathering place. And that functioned, I thought, really well. My 2 biggest impressions.
So if you walked along the bayfront, a little beyond the Ringling territory, it got pretty wild. There was a banyan tree, and just beyond that, it was just brush and weeds mostly. Also, there was a point in early '69 where most of us, well, half of us, let's say, were planning on trying to do a living and learning semester in a more rural location than New College. And it wasn't hard to find things that were almost totally undeveloped. A lot of people owned land near the college, and they would maybe let us start a little educational experiment there. I remember once Kitty and I went to scout out a piece of land, and a wild armadillo ran right in front of us, which was very shocking at the time. I don't think either of us had ever seen one before. Even if you just walked along the bay in the other direction toward the art museum and beyond, there were places that were still fairly undeveloped.
To your question, Mike, I was thinking of the architecture of the place, but the culture of it. I was in high school. I'd gone with my girlfriend for all through high school, and she was a year ahead of me and went to Stanford. So Stanford was the only college I applied to, didn't get in. And at the last moment, I went to a prep school, 50 boys, and everybody had gotten into college but me. And then I got a solicitation from New College. I got this letter, and it had an embossed logo at the top, a Novum Collegium. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. I thought it was like a joke. Like, here's a college that calls itself New College, and it uses a dead language to make itself look, credible or something. So one of my first reactions when I got to New College was this odd paradox of a college that viewed itself as being extremely progressive, very experimental, but had gotten its accreditation by hiring a lot of Ivy League, kind of not stuffy, but very traditional teachers with traditional expectations, even though the school itself, was pass only. It wasn't even pass fail. And so in my 1 year, really struggled with a college that seemed to not be integrated with itself very well.
Was Toynbee teaching when you were there?
He was only there a year at the beginning, before any of us, I think.
Yeah. I remember the area. First of all, I hitchhiked to Miami one time and found myself in the middle of the Everglades, and it was just so beautiful. And I hope there's still some places like that. Millions of birds around, and wonderful. And one time up here on my first LSD trip, I was feeling a lot of electricity, and I thought that was what being high was like. This was in November of '68, I think. And my roommate, we lived off campus at that time. He walked by and he asked me how I was doing. I said, I'm going to ask. He asked me how I was doing. And I said, everything's electric. And he said, that's fear you're feeling. And he said, what do you really want to do? And I thought of this girl that I liked. And I said, I'd like to go visit so-and-so. And he said, do it. And so that brought me into like myself. And I got on my bicycle. And the reason I'm telling this now, I went down the Tamiami Trail I think it was Siesta Key, where some people lived in a house. And Sarasota was pretty built up even then. But I mean, I'm sure, exponentially today.
Yeah.
And so that's what I remember, going through a lot of malls even then and stuff. But then the ocean, I went after I had this talk with this girl where I, in delusion, thought she was going to be my girlfriend. I went to the ocean and did a little ritual and surrendered everything to the ocean, all my joy. But right now, I just wanted to share that Sarasota area picture.
Yeah.
In the Chinese restaurant, I don't know if that's still there, just down the trail.
The Golden
yeah.
Buddha.
Not there anymore. They turned it into a lighthouse, I think.
Yeah, just recently, within I think the past 3 years, I think.
That's pretty cool. The Golden Buddha was there that far back, though. That does say something. That's quite a bike ride, Max.
That's a few miles. Yeah.
But I want to. This is not an advertisement for LSD, because in 8 trips I became an LSD casualty, and I'm fortunate to be alive and well today.
That's the public service announcement.
Much needed.
When I first enrolled in '67, there was no Golden Buddha. It was a Middle Eastern restaurant called the Mecca. That's why that tower is there next to it, or was next to it anyway. It was like a little prayer tower.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
the
think
street was Mecca.
Yeah.
How about Cars of Yesteryear? Is that still there?
Oh, that's a thing now. See, that's become baseball fields.
Just happened.
Just happened this year. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's a big to do over that. Oh, yeah.
I've had several semi-lucid dreams of what goes on inside the Cars of Yesteryear Museum. And that was without the aid of LSD, but that was there was something very liminal about that location. And then the fact that it was Cars of Yesteryear. It's kind of sad that some of those elements are going away. They're apparently going to turn it into a baseball field where the Pei monster will be the left field outfield as part of the new invention of New College that we frequently lament as part of this podcast. In some ways, it's refreshing that y'all are less perhaps plugged into that. Also because it was just, kind of a brief moment in your lives. Many of you were just there for, a brief period, but, something about 1969, the late 60s, just really captures the imagination of those of us who weren't there. I see another picture up here, David.
Yeah, this is us on the farm.
Is it a commune, or what's the name of the farm?
So what happened was, and I kind of take this personally because I got kicked out. I mean, here's a college that is pass only. Doesn't even, you can fail as many classes as you want and it doesn't count against you. And I managed to fail. I get kicked out of that college.
Yeah.
And what happened was when they told me that you weren't required to go to classes or pass tests, all that mattered was your independent study project and passing these 3 comprehensive exams, I left. I just hitchhiked all over the country and had lots of fun. Came back. I did my ISP. Ross Madden and I hitchhiked across the country, and I did a photo essay of that. And then I passed 2 out of the 3 exams. And I was told, I was in the Palm Court, and somebody walked up to me and said, you need to defend why the school should allow you to come back. I made a list of all the books I'd read and the adventures I'd had and everything. And I walked into Hamilton Center, whatever it's called, and there was in this room, like a boardroom, there was a horseshoe faculty and administrators sitting without a table in front of them, just an open horseshoe. And I was summoned to stand in the middle of that horseshoe and just orally defend why I should come back. You know, I was scared. I'd never gotten kicked out of anything. I was like a good little kid and everything. Very kind of earnestly read my list of books and everything. And they said, okay, we're going to make a decision, wait outside. About 5 minutes later, on a handwritten piece of paper, it said, you've been dismissed. And then I found out that Steve Halsey had also been dismissed, and he knew the Hannahs. So Barb Hannah, Kathy Hannah, her younger sister, and Sherman Hannah, her brother, their dad owned a farmhouse in Dryden, New York, near Ithaca, middle of the state. He owned this farmhouse, but had never lived there. It was just empty. And so the word got out among New College students, not just those who were leaving, but those who were planning on coming back in September, come up to the Commune in Dryden. Within weeks after graduation, people were coming to the Commune. They started building a candle factory in the barn so we could support ourselves. And by, let's say, September of 1969, I don't know, we had max, 20 people or something?
Yeah.
Commune.
Do you remember what we called the thing? And we wrote it on our mailbox.
Wasn't it just the farm?
And it was called
At some point there was
Bunny Farm.
Happy Bunny Farm, yeah.
The Happy Bunny Farm. We had a day glow mailbox and everything.
I stayed in Ithaca for 10 years.
Yeah.
Ended up farming there. And so I would go back to the farm and, old memories and all that kind of stuff. And my girlfriend from the time still lives in Ithaca. She helped start Moosewood Restaurant. She's still there.
Who remembers when the sheriff came with his posse? As I remember, I was super high and really scared of, it was so surrealistic. It was straight out of, a Mr. Natural comic book. And I don't remember what happened. They just sort of showed themselves, said a few gruff things, and then left. And it was like, what just happened?
When I was there, a county legislator came to have dinner and share some things that he's been hearing with us, mostly complaints by the neighbors, even though they didn't really know anything about it.
We also helped the neighboring farmers with their hay harvest.
We had a job at Cornell that we rotated as a janitor. At some point, people from Cornell would come out once a month or once a week or something and observe us. When we first made contact, Megan in particular, as I remember, was asking about the 60s, and you brought it up again, Mike. And so I've been thinking about this. I just want to share a little story as I've struggled. I mean, I know the 60s are famous for what they were. I'm just trying to figure out what happened. I was there, what happened? First off, there's something very similar, the 1960s to the 1920s. Both were preceded by just a catastrophic world war. And the younger generation kind of didn't want to have anything to do with their parents or their predecessors. They wanted to create a new world. And in the 1920s, jazz was the music. And Hoagie Carmichael wrote his autobiography. He said jazz hit Indiana University like a hurricane. And this is going to sound silly, but he said it changed. If you were into jazz as a student, it just changed your life. And you didn't listen to your parents anymore. You started dressing differently. And he even mentioned girls stopped wearing panties. And it just reminded me of the 60s. It was very similar. We had rock and roll. Right. I was trying to think, when did I first decide I didn't want to be like my parents? And I can remember I was 12 years old. I was living with my dad. He would come home from work. I would go with him into his bedroom. And I loved just sitting there watching him undress. Like he's in a suit and tie, take his suit, jacket, put it in the closet, take his tie off. And down and he had wore garters because before they had stockings that stayed up. And I just can remember being enamored. I loved him and I loved what he was doing and I wanted to be that way. So that was, I'm 12 years old. Now, about 13 years old or 14, I'm in the school bus and the first Beatles song I'd ever heard came on. I Want to Hold Your Hand. I remember thinking that it was a kind of stupid song. I mean, first of all, even at 13 or 14, I was beyond holding hands.
Right.
And then the way they sang with that, it wasn't like the rock and roll that I loved. I thought it was stupid. At the same time, I thought it was so exciting. It just totally grabbed me. Now, the reason I mention that is that my dad produced the first rock and roll TV show on the West Coast called Wink Martindale's Dance Party. I was used to going every week for the shooting of it, and I met Fabian, Frankie Avalon, and Dion the Belmonts. All that music was part of my dad's generation, even though it was rock and roll. It was all commercial, manufactured. None of those artists wrote their own music. None of those artists had any control over the music. It was a product. And starting with the Beatles were the first Grammy-nominated artist to have written their own music. And that's why that music was so idiosyncratic. It was like nothing else I'd ever heard before. Dylan was coming up at the same time. Folk music was really popular among teenagers, like the Kingston Trio and that kind of stuff. And so once Dylan entered the folk realm, there was this union of rock and roll and the protest piece of the folk kind of movement. So before the Beatles, I didn't know anybody who was in a band.
Yeah.
Then a year after the Beatles, it was common to hear of other kids being in bands. Every boy was like looking for a guitar. And so I realized by the time I was about 40, it's not so much that I'd taken an off ramp, but the road I was traveling and the road that my father was on were divergent. I wasn't consciously disapproving of anything he did or anything, but I was just paying attention to this road that was taking me away from my dad and my parents and what had come first. And I'm not arguing that the Beatles or even rock and roll was the factor. I don't think it was. I think it was part of, a stew of things that was happening. But that was my first realization that I was now at 14. I wasn't going to grow up to be like my parents.
Michael, I'd like to address your question about what was unique about Sarasota and the New College community at that time.
Sure.
From my perspective, personal memories, but I tend to recall the more pleasant things and forget the rest. But I recall it was probably the fall of '68, walking along the bayfront. And I was with Andy. I don't know if Andy remembers this or not, and someone else. It may have been Kitty. It may have been Laurel. I'm not sure. I believe it was Kitty. But it was like a jungle. It was pretty much uninhabited, walking around the edge of the bay there. And someone picked a mango, and Andy had a machete and split it open, and we ate the mango right there. That was great.
What was I doing with the machete you might have?
I learned to sail on Sarasota Bay. We just had these little sunfish boats.
Yeah.
One night, I went out in a canoe with Hal Piercy. I have no idea what became of him. He was highly thought of as a resident artist at the time. His work was on display in the Hamilton Center, but we were doing the drug du jour, I guess, and Hal was paddling, and I was dragging my fingers in the water, and it was really dark, and there's phosphorescent flame. Drag your hands. I'm sure some of you have experienced this, but it was just an incredible feeling out there at the bay. The time I went sailing with Reed Curry in a sunfish on the bay, and we didn't have much sense, and we sailed in stormy weather, and we crashed, bent the mast on the sunfish, and some older guys in a boat picked us up and took us back. He told us how foolish we were for dealing in that weather. Gave us shots of whiskey to calm us down. But as far as community, New College to me pretty much was it. It was an isolated oasis. I didn't go to town much. Occasionally I rode my bicycle, walked a few times, but usually rode the bicycle because it was pretty far. And I remember riding across a bridge. I believe it was the St. Armand's Key, but I'm not sure. There was a bridge, a booth at the top. I eventually got a little 50cc motorbike to get around on and just ride it along Bayfront Road. I forget the name of it now, but all that was so pleasant to me. And it was like carefree. It was almost like a temporary vacation from responsibilities. Sometimes, okay, this is cool, it's fun, there's a lot of great people here, but I got to do something with my life, or at least I thought it is. As you get to a certain age, you realize you don't really have to, that's just, but you have to go through all that to get to that point. And I think that's one of the beauties of being older. You've made all the stupid mistakes, and if you survived, which all of us have, you realize a lot of that struggle was just in vain. You learned some things, but you did a lot of hard things that you didn't have. Anyhow, we're a lot of people in a short time. So
thanks for sharing.
David, could you show some more pictures?
Yeah.
I just want to ask, like, okay, upstate New York, 1969, I immediately think Woodstock.
Yeah.
Like, how close is Dryden to that?
Dryden's, an hour and a half or something away. It's not close at all. They weren't related.
Yeah. Like, you were talking about, like, neighbors coming over and checking on you. I was wondering, like, if they're like, oh, the things are going on over there, maybe they're going on over here, something like that.
Dryden is in the Finger Lakes, right by it.
Oh, right. Okay.
And but Woodstock occurred that summer, and a whole contingent from the farm went to Woodstock. You go to Woodstock?
No, I went to Denmark instead.
I didn't go either. I stayed at the farm.
So I went to Woodstock with the group from the farm, and they sold the candles that they made there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they sold them out in like a few minutes before we hardly even got there. They would burn for like 10 hours.
We called the company the Afterglow Candle Company. Nice.
I did end up going to the Isle of Wight festival where the same people
right.
did Woodstock.
Amazing. And Max, I saw there was mention of a psychedelic bus trip to psychedelic hearse, excuse me, a hearse.
There's Chuck Connor.
What kind?
Mm.
Yeah.
There's Penny.
David Peeney and Bill Hedman.
Oh,
I've heard of David Peeney. He's sort of a legendary character for me.
I want to tell a story about him, if I may. Bill was a fine poet, inspiration to many people. His poems are although he didn't survive, he was in an auto accident. but his poems are on. David Peeney was a film buff and a scholar and a wonderful person. And I understood that they wrote into the new college bylaws that you had to be a matriculating paying student or scholarship, I guess, to live on campus unless your name was David Peeney. And he would be on and off for a long time. So my story is that one day, it was February 1st, 1969, and I was walking to breakfast from where Andy and I were sharing a room in the dorms, and I was going across the palm court, and I saw David Peeney coming from another angle, and we joined and we walked together, and I knew it was David Peeney, but I'm not sure how, because he had a New York Times. You couldn't see his face at all. And he was walking and reading, and we weren't talking. He was just reading. We were going to breakfast the Saturday morning, and he says to me, here's an interesting story. And he says, there was a man who lived in India and didn't speak, and he said he was God. And he said he would speak before he died, and he just died yesterday. And his name was Meher Baba. And I was bemused by that. We went to breakfast after that. But as life went along, I got connected with Meher Baba. It's a whole other story. And he's been my spiritual guide for 54 years. And that's one of the real things that came out of New College for me.
Wow.
Woody Tree, we called her. There's Jack and Bill Herman, Jack Cousineau. I'm still in touch with Jack. That's Kitty. Can you see it?
This is a photo I took.
Yeah. What a cutie.
Yeah, she was. She was, our crumb. She was kind of she was like an Art Crumb character. Just blunt she was, and just a sweetheart. Here's Max.
Yeah. Nice. Girl named Charlotte.
Just out on the palm court.
Where's Truly?
We were having a swap meet where we bring stuff that you don't want, you just swap it.
That was an idea from Ed Stress, who came to the con occasionally from the Bay Area.
We talked about Ed Stress in the pre-video
Yeah.
because we all have really funny memories of him. He was somebody that was picked up, and he ended up living on campus for a year.
Yeah.
Used to be a high school physics teacher. till he dropped out.
Yeah, he's kind of a beatnik.
I want to tell my story about when I met
Please.
him at a rainbow gathering. I walked away from the large crowd in the national forest. There was this naked man walking towards me. He had flowers in his beard. It was Ed Stress. And he said, "Hey, hi, Andy. What's going on?" As if we had just been together for years.
That's pretty wild. And then these
Yeah.
photos of Palm Court, because by the time we were there in the late 80s, early 90s, there were a lot of like dance parties. There was a lot of music.
Because that in place even then.
Yeah.
This is Steve Posey. There's Chuck Connor. So now we're getting, when we got to Nixon's inauguration,
Yeah.
January of 1969, we got a hearse. So here we are. There's Chuck Connor right in front of it. Here's
No.
Peeney,
John Moody, yeah.
John Moody. So the Yippies took over and we're having what they called like a counter inauguration. So here's Max. Max, wasn't it you who got to
Yeah.
go?
Yeah, I rented a gorilla suit and we wore it in the parade.
That would make it guerrilla theater, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Pun on Gorilla Theater.
That was kind of a yippie thing. Okay, there's the hearse.
Yeah, they're
Wow.
ready to go. Or
Whose car was it? Anybody remember?
The hearse belonged to Curtis Stokes from Ohio, who said he was a freshman at the time, or a first year student.
And how many people got packed into that car?
all this group, this whole group went.
15.
I count about 10 people. Okay.
I think there were 12 in the back and 3 in the front.
Get a free pass to the drive-in with that many in a car.
Oh, yes. I love the city of Cars of Yesteryear. So what was happening in this one? There's a cop car and then a sort of easy rider kind of thing going on the right side with the motorcycle.
I don't know even where I got this picture.
Oh, that came from the yearbook, the 1969
yeah, that's
yearbook
right.
that you shared with
Well, that's-
us.
That's right.
Thank you again for sharing
Yeah.
Of course.
all of that. That was
They're really beautiful, naturalistic photos. I love them.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to romanticize the 60s. And I think the age that you're at when you're going to college is a special time in your life for everybody, probably identically magical, you know?
Yeah.
And so the kind of attributes of the 60s were kind of like wallpaper around. I mean, it was there and it had significance. There's no question about it. The drugs are one obvious example of
Right.
the 60s, but it was just another decade, really.
Behind it, we were people.
Yeah.
But how about the
Absolutely.
time when a group of people took over president's office or something, and it was like,
yeah.
what are you protesting? Whatever you want, we'll let you do.
One professor told me I was thrown out for academic insufficiency, and at that time in my life, I think I was too confused. Dr. What was his name? Bergren?
Yeah.
Bergeron, Douglas Bergeron.
The course was good, but I couldn't focus yet. I am an artist now. But anyways, after they voted me out, one of the professors' name was that Professor Peeney. He came out and told me, and there's a picture of me that was in the yearbook. I would bring people coffee and bagels to their rooms on Sundays.
It was so cool, Max.
Yeah. So Professor Feeney came up to me and said, "Oh, I just learned you're the bagel guy. If I'd known that, I wouldn't have voted to expel you."
Is that Jim Feeney?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
He was our study
Feeney was-
abroad guy.
That's
Never understood a single word that Dr. Berggren said in lectures. Not
Yeah.
one.
He was my thesis advisor. So yeah, I totally know what you mean.
And the book we read, Principles of Art by Charles Collingwood. I mean, it seemed interesting to me, but I couldn't do the work because of my psychological condition.
Wow.
Actually, only you were thrown out because you didn't complete an ISP or submit one or something like that.
I did submit one, but it wasn't satisfactory, and to my advisor. And I thought I was not because I was a yippie at that time, which I was. I actually got Paul Krasner to come to the campus and give a talk. Sort of glommed onto him, and he avoided me like he hated me, but he gave a great talk.
Yeah.
So,
And who remembers Professor Rains?
Jack Rain.
And what was her name? Prudence.
Prudence, yeah. Prudence.
Yeah. I did a tutorial with him on, we called it Sanity and Madness.
I did that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I failed. They're looking for another category for me.
Confession to make. I actually got college credit for a course that I taught. It's on my record. It was about dreams and dream interpretation or something. And we sat with our feet in the pool in the Pei Dorm. And somehow they got onto my transcript. And when I transferred for my master's degree or somewhere later, they actually gave me credit for it too.
Wow.
That was one of my
Double dipping.
victories.
Well, it's been an amazing conversation with all of you. We're getting close to time, so we've gotten some pearls of wisdom, I think, from everyone who's on the call already, which is fantastic, incredible stories. But any concluding thoughts, any ways to kind of wrap things up, at least in your mind, that you want to share with our listeners?
I'll say one thing. The feeling that I have right now, first of all, I appreciate that you guys are doing the podcast and that you invited us. Again, as I said at the beginning, other than my keeping up with Max a bit, the rest of us have not been connected. Here we are connected together on a Zoom call and recalling all these memories. You know, it's weird to grow old, to become an old person.
Yeah.
All of us from 69, we're old people. You guys, I know you're on the track, you're headed. We're in there, you know. And I've just found it shocking to be there. I just been tough for me to accept.
David, it's a state of mind. This guy leads a jazz orchestra in Los Angeles every Sunday night. I mean, you're not exactly wasting away in a rocking chair.
No, I know. Thank you for that.
Get that in, David.
But, you know, I love playing jazz. I get to play with all these great people. It's so thrilling for me. At the same time, there's this reality.
Yeah.
I'm an old person. I have wrinkles on my face, and I've seen what happens to people like me. They die. You know, I'm not arguing that everybody should find it difficult to accept. I hope everybody does a better job with it than I. I thought by this age I would have found a way to accept it. I haven't.
When the pandemic came, I tried to come to terms with my mortality. And I'm doing meditation, but I couldn't. All I could do was see me like walking around or driving around, you know, like the Energizer Bunny. But I'm currently taking a poetry course from a very wonderful poet named Rosemary Watola Trommer. It's called 4 weeks: love, death, desire, madness. And so I'm trying to face it a little bit more. That's all we can do until the time when we really have to face it. But I think I'm trying to prepare. I don't know. Hopefully it'll help some.
You had connections with some of the Buffalo Springfield, didn't you, when you were younger?
I did. So my girlfriend in my senior year of high school, when I met her, she was coming off an LSD trip. She was living with Neil Young in Laurel Canyon. He was Neil's girlfriend. She was a singer-songwriter, and her dad, do you remember Dean Martin?
Yeah, sure.
Dean Martin had his own show. He had a variety show. Piano player on the show, and that was Robin's dad. Her dad wrote Everybody Loves Somebody, and she was a great songwriter. So we were boyfriend and girlfriend all through. I got to find this picture because you guys will howl.
If I could interrupt, it's really lovely to connect with all of you. It's so good to see you. We haven't spoken since New College, but you got the same spirit. You know, I remember now why I liked you, and I still like you. And the same is true for all of you, really. You're the same people. Just our bodies got older. So the fuck what?
Yeah, keep that attitude. Stuff is there. So it's all there. It's physically, you just become. You'll see. You'll have.
But that's also why things like this we are very much appreciative of everything you're sharing. Like these stories, we need to capture them because like we're learning, and you know, our depth of understanding of this place that we love is much deeper because you're really giving something special to us. So thank you. Thank you to all of you for joining us to really share some.
David said, let's make it a series. So I'll leave you with that thought.
Yeah, please. Well, we'll share this and share it out to your networks. I think folks will hopefully eat it up. And if folks like what they're hearing, please let us know. You know, we want to do more like this. If you have ideas for shows like this, we'd love to do it. And yeah, we'd love to get the band back together and keep on keeping on. We're going to wrap up here. Thanks again to everyone for joining.
Thanks for having us.